You have apologized to an inanimate object this week. Maybe more than once. And the thing is, you didn't think twice about it. Because for you, an apology doesn't require a reason. It runs before you decide to give it. It just runs. The question isn't why you apologize so much. The question is, what is the apology actually doing? This isn't a politeness quirk. It isn't anxiety. What's underneath compulsive apologizing is one of the oldest survival programs the nervous system has. One that was written for a very specific environment. And one that's been running long past the moment that environment ended. Here's what makes it almost impossible to catch. From the inside, it doesn't feel like fear. It feels like being a good person. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why you apologize before you've decided whether you should, and what it's been costing you in every relationship you actually care about. There's a particular kind of person who apologizes for bumping into a chair, who says sorry to the automated phone system when they press the wrong number, who starts every email with "so sorry to bother you" when they're not bothering anyone, who apologizes for crying, for needing something, for taking up space in a room they were explicitly invited into. If that sounds like you, not someone you know, but you, then what's happening has nothing to do with politeness. Over-apologizing is a signal. Your nervous system learned at some point that simply existing without preemptively softening your presence was risky. The solution it arrived at: apologize constantly, reflexively, before anything has even happened, to make yourself smaller, safer, less likely to provoke. Psychologist Pete Walker, who spent decades working with survivors of complex trauma, identified 4 primary responses to perceived threat: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. The fawn response develops when a person learns that the fastest way to neutralize a threat is to appease it, to agree, to minimize themselves, to say they're sorry, and not because they've done anything wrong, but because the apology itself is what keeps the environment manageable. Walker found this response is most deeply ingrained in people who experienced chronic emotional instability early in life. Not necessarily abuse. Sometimes it's a parent whose anger was unpredictable. Calm one moment, explosive the next, with no clear rule for what triggered the switch. Sometimes it's simply a family that treated harmony as the highest value, and conflict as something close to catastrophic. The child in that environment learns fast. The apology is a preemptive move. Saying "I'm sorry" before anything escalates keeps the peace. Making yourself smaller, quieter, less demanding, less visible is how you stay safe. And that child grows up and keeps doing it. In their friendships, in their relationships at work, in their own head, apologizing for wanting things, for feeling things, lying awake rehearsing apologies for conversations that haven't happened yet. Here's what no one tells you about the fawn response. It doesn't feel like fear from the inside. It feels like consideration. It feels like being thoughtful and careful and good. That's precisely what makes it so hard to see in yourself. There's something the fawn response does that goes deeper than the apologizing itself. Something that's actually making the exact thing you're most afraid of worse. That's what we're getting to. You didn't develop this habit by accident. You were trained into it by an environment that made it the most logical available response. Jeffrey Young, the psychologist behind schema therapy, identified what he calls the subjugation schema, the largely unconscious belief that your needs, your feelings, and your preferences are less valid than those of the people around you. That asserting yourself leads to punishment, or abandonment, or a kind of conflict you won't survive intact. People with a subjugation schema don't experience over-apologizing as a habit. They experience it as correctness, the obviously right response whenever they might have inconvenienced someone or been in some small way too much. Think about what this looks like in the quiet moments. The person who apologizes for asking their waiter to repeat the specials, who says sorry when someone else bumps into them on the street, who prefaces every opinion with "I might be wrong," but even when they're not wrong. What's happening in those moments is not deliberate. Politeness is deliberate. This is automatic. The nervous system deploying its oldest tool. Before the conscious mind has even registered there's a situation to respond to. Pay attention to what happens the next time someone says, "You really don't have to apologize for that." Notice whether you feel relief, or whether there's a flicker of disorientation. Because if the apology wasn't necessary, then what was the feeling that drove it? Here's what that means. And this is the part that surprises almost everyone. You cannot tell the difference between genuine remorse and conditioned fear from the inside. They feel identical. Both involve saying sorry, both carry urgency. The difference is entirely in the source. Genuine remorse comes after understanding, after you've assessed what happened, recognized the impact, and concluded that an apology is the right response. Conditioned fear anticipates someone else's discomfort before any assessment has taken place. It doesn't wait for evidence. It just apologizes because the apology is what makes the discomfort stop. And the more automatic this becomes, the further you drift from your own experience of what actually happened. By the time you've wondered whether an apology was necessary, you've already given 3. Here's what the cost of this actually is. And it's not the one most people expect. Most people assume the danger is being seen as weak or being taken advantage of. Those things happen, but they're not what makes this hard to change. The real cost shows up in your closest relationships, in the gap that opens, slowly, quietly, between you and the people you most want to be close to. When you're always pre-managing, always apologizing before anyone has even reacted, you never let anyone actually meet you. The people in your life are in a relationship with a curated version of you. And on some level, often without being able to name it, they can feel that something is missing. They sense the distance between who they're getting and who's actually there. The person who apologizes for everything often wonders why they feel strangely lonely inside relationships that look fine. This is why. Real connection requires presence, and presence requires being willing to take up space without apologizing for it first. Here's the reframe, and this is something most people spend months in therapy arriving at. Apologizing less is not about becoming rude. It's about locating the line between 2 things that feel from the inside completely identical. Genuine accountability and reflexive self-erasure. Genuine accountability feels grounded. You know what you did. You understand the impact. The apology comes from that understanding. Specific, weighted, arriving after something real. Reflexive self-erasure feels urgent. It arrives before understanding, before any assessment of what happened, before you've determined whether a response was even required. It's a management strategy, what you do to stop the discomfort and return the room to something that feels safe. The practice. The next time you feel the pull to apologize, stop for 3 seconds. Ask one question. Did I actually do something wrong? Not, could someone be bothered? Did I do something wrong? If yes, apologize, genuinely, specifically once. If the question feels almost irrelevant, if the apology is forming regardless of the answer, that's the signal. That's the fawn response running its program. That's the subjugation schema doing what it was built to do. You can notice it without obeying it. And that noticing is where things begin to shift. The apology was never really for the other person. It was for you, to stop the discomfort, to return the room to something that felt safe. When you can see that clearly, you stop needing to apologize for it. And the ones you give after that, those actually mean something. The fawn response doesn't make you weak. The subjugation schema isn't a character flaw. These are strategies, built for an environment that may no longer exist, by someone who was doing the best they could with what they had. What you're learning to do isn't to stop caring. You're going to keep caring. You're just going to stop hiding inside that care. What do you apologize for most often that, if you're honest, you didn't actually need to? Drop it below. I read everyone.